what's going on, everyone? I was thinking about this on my run, so I'm gonna do a quick video. And it's just sort of like, I'm not a lawyer. I was a political science major. I think I have an LSAT prep book somewhere, but um, so don't talk, right, is what everyone says. But anyways, this is just like sort of understanding both like the psychology, but like mostly within the legal context of what might happen in the P Diddy trial or someone's a trial that's someone like Sean Combs or whatever. Um, and so I kind of want to focus on where like criminality actually comes into it. Um, and so when we think of like the most recent case, which was in the public sphere, was I think it was Daryl Brooks or something, and lots of coverage on like witness examination and cross examination, and so I want to talk about that a little bit. And so, the types of like linear storylines that a state attorney is going to attempt to do in a racketeering and sex trafficking case is where it's not like outright. You might not have like text messages or something like that to whatever it is, like a brothel or something like that, or like direct threats towards someone. So some people say, well, is it criminal? Well, it's helpful to think of what people might say to that. And so, someone goes on the stand, the types of questions they're going to ask is like, well, did you go to a party at P Diddy's house? Yes. Okay. Like, did you sort of like drink alcohol? What was at the party? Who was at the party, right? And so this is already starting to get important, right? When you're going to ask if someone was intoxicated. Did you bring drugs? Were there drugs there? Was there alcohol there? Did you bring alcohol? Was there already alcohol there? Is this like a catered event, something like this? And so what you start to see is you start having bartenders, you start having maybe hors d'oeuvres, stuff like this, is that this was at least planned, right? This was a planned event, and there was at least this other thing. And then so you sort of start connecting these. Well, who else was at the party? Was it other celebrities? Was it other, was it just like people, like friends? Was it like workers? Was it a professional party or something like this? If there's an event or something like that. And then you start getting the second component. So there's a planned event and who it was for, right? And this is still starting to work into elements of why someone might say that there was like sex trafficking or something that was going on. And what you start eventually getting is this almost clarified view where you had someone who plans things, right? Maybe no criminal behavior, who had this event. And at some point, there's this introduction of people who may have been underage, or if they even just give a testimony, right? This is already starting to be powerful when you have someone that says, well, I felt like I was coerced, I felt like I couldn't leave, I felt like I was brought there on false pretenses, I felt like there was some sort of monetary exchange that happened either before or after that was implied about whatever happened at that event. Um, and so as you start calling, what like the state might do in this case or in other cases is start having people describe what their relationship is what a lawyer might normally say about this, but it's actually the relationship with the specific sort of context where they interacted, within sort of, P. Diddy's sphere of influence or someone like P. Diddy's sphere of influence. And where the criminality starts coming in is not only just this event, because you can have a million situations where someone says, I didn't feel comfortable, and it might be criminal, right? And the majority of them, or a high portion of them, people say, I was brought there, there's some unscrupulous stuff that happens, and I didn't feel comfortable, I couldn't leave, my rights and my liberties were somehow taken away or deprived. But that still can prove that, hey, this guy got too drunk. This guy wasn't invited there for this reason. He did it anyways. This was, some other, whatever the agreement was between these two people, it had nothing to do with this other person. But, like when you have a criminal case, the state prosecutor is not going to say that, right? The state prosecutor is going to go a completely different route. And this is where it does get sort of psychological. Because they're going to take the same exact picture we just talked about that seems like it could be completely innocuous, non-criminal. It seems like there could be criminality between different parties. And they're going to say, well, look, you had these underage people that were in, this person's network. They were invited there. and there was alcohol and booze and all this other stuff. There was maybe drugs. There was the entire point of this event was to do this. And so this wasn't a planned event. This was a narcissistic event, right? They're going to want the jury to see that this is a form of narcissism where someone planned something illegal and they did something because they thought that they couldn't get in trouble for it. They didn't think what they were doing was wrong. They didn't think about how it impacted other people and those consequences. And so, just again, kind of thinking about how, when you need context, you need this sort of context to fall into a description of any sort of like state or federal statute. And so, a lot of this sort of same testimony might, like prosecutors might, I don't know what the charges are. This is probably set in stone, but in similar cases, like prosecutors will look at things like, well, did someone cross state lines? Is this, when you start talking about racketeering on top of this, were there business relationships or business partnerships that were happening at the same time while you had people that shouldn't have been there, didn't want to be there, didn't understand what they're supposed to be there, or even in cases agreed to be there for the reason of, some sort of exchange or whatever it is. Were those people there and this was actually like a business or profit-seeking event? Because in that case, then you still have sort of this planning aspect. It wasn't an accident. All these storylines got in there at once. It wasn't an accident that there's no like misconception. No one was going to the bathroom and lighting up like a, marijuana joint or something, They weren't like hiding it. It was the whole point of whatever these events were where these people were interacting was specifically, sort of what maybe was libation, but it ended up being, criminal. And so that element, again, of a narcissistic sort of motivation or whatever term they end up coming up with is going to be, like, really important, right? That, in a lot of senses, ties together the fact that, you had these material events, you have timelines, you probably have physical evidence that will be subpoenaed for these things and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, it was because there was some reason why, the benefit of this was just better than the cost, and there wasn't a thought to the law. So, I know that these cases are super hot buttons, so I'm just going to say my mea culpas because it's for my own well-being. Is, I haven't done much research on specifically the Diddy case or, what evidence there is. What the victims are claiming as well, and what sort of, when you put together the physical evidence alongside the witnesses that will likely be subpoenaed as well, and why there's like a criminal story. I don't know any of that. I don't know if it is, it isn't, it could be the same thing. But still, I think the main point is that, you're going to have two similar narratives coming from the, it's likely you're going to have two similar material circumstances coming from defense attorneys and from state prosecutors. And they're going to want to reach varying levels of severity of cases. And so, just also a side note, there's probably a lawyer somewhere, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but there's probably a lawyer who also knows that, like, these types of cases that maybe have some sort of like lynchpin, there's some sort of foundational grounding to actually say that this is, the sort of scope and scale of either racketeering or sex trafficking in these cases. And also being able to build the case around the severity, even within like a specific statute, when they're talking about, going to bat for the state and for the victims, as well as trying to argue for certain consequences and willing to rest the entire case on those types of things. And so I don't know how long they've been investigating this stuff, how strong the evidence is and all that stuff, but when it comes to like public and stuff like that, this is partially what we saw with like, the O.J. Simpson case, right? No one would have thought, like, just you wake up and you see O.J. Simpson did something illegal, and then all of a sudden the entire legal case for this, a double homicide is being built in public. And so when you're talking about having to prove to an objective, impartial jury of your peers or whatever it is. They can objectively look at this stuff and do it. They're impartial. They're willing to learn the law basically anew. And you're trying to prove that there's this narcissistic intent that goes beyond neglect. It goes specifically into profit motive, and it goes specifically into being, deliberate or intentional, premeditated in some senses. Who knows? I think the court system's really good, and but it's definitely going to be something that both sides have to pull and play on a little bit. I would imagine they have to work into it or around it. But ultimately still comes down to that, it's going to come down to a lot of, I think, testimony of what actually, what did people see, feel, hear, experience as they arrive to sort of these P. Diddy shindigs, or whatever the context is, and what was the role, what was the understood role of Sean Combs, or whatever in these things, and and does it appear that both victim testimony, statements that they've given, as well as if they had end up having the victims testify, and if that's backed by forms of physical evidence, is that consistent within this? Is it consistent? Is it also, whatever? And so, again, if you're a defense attorney, you're going to try and prove that this was, totally innocuous or something. There's no reason to be concerned. If you're the state, you're going to argue that it had to have been somehow narcissistic, planned, totally individualistic, and done without thought of consequences, and intentionally, at some senses, they're going to say that, Sean Combs, any defendant in the case, would have had to known that they were objectifying, as well as, making individuals, act as some sort of business asset versus anything else. That's a hard case, because that's what sex trafficking and racketeering is.